Nice buns, soft, fluffy, and ultra-low net carbs. Discover Hero Bread, the delicious, ultra-low net carb bread with incredible taste and texture. Hero Bread has 0 grams of sugar and is under 100 calories per serving. Plus, high in fiber with 5 to 10 grams of protein per serving. Order from hero.co now and get 10% off your first purchase with promo code AH10. That's 10% off with code AH10. HERO.co.
This is
Make It Plain.
MIP
With Masamela Matfumo.
Mark Thompson.
Make it plain.
Get woke.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have talked a great deal about the great victory in Georgia during the Georgia runoffs. Unprecedented. People voting in a special election when people normally don't vote in a special election. And that's everywhere, all over the country. What Georgia did was tremendous. And we owe a great debt of gratitude to some of the goddesses, is what I call them, that make that happen. We've talked about Stacey Abrams. We've talked about Sister Latasha Brown. But the New Georgia Project was equally as instrumental. And another sister that we've been hearing about, and we have her right here with us today. We're going to hear all about it. This is Black History Month. We'll hear a little bit about that as well. And what's next? I was just talking to her before this interview, hoping she could get a break, but she was reminding me there's still a whole lot of other stuff on the table. And that's what we need to be trained to do. We can never stop being conscientious about going to the ballot. That's why sometimes we aren't prepared when it's a special. But we'll get into that with her. She'll give us our marching orders here from the New Georgia Project. Its principal officer, Nse Ufot, is here on Make It Plain.
Hello.
Hey, what's going on? How you doing? Congratulations, first of all.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate it. I thank you so much. It feels good to be a Georgian for the moment.
I feel good, and I ain't even no Georgian. I feel good about it. I was down there doing some work with the Black Church PAC and organizing some of these churches. I mean, everybody came together.
We love Pastor Mike. Let me say that.
That's right. Yeah. I mean, that's not supposed to. I mean, white folks don't even vote in special elections. I mean, that's just a phenomenon of America. White folks don't even do it. You got all of us in a special election. How did you do that?
In our community, they say that if you stay ready, you don't have to get ready. And so one of the arguments that we've been making for quite some time is investing in independent Black political infrastructure. Right. And so the idea is that you don't come in with your trash bag full of cash a couple of weeks before the election, handing it out to your favorite pastor or your favorite Black leader and saying, turn your people out. Right. That doesn't build power for us over the long term. There's not a data culture that's surrounding that. We don't know where our folks are. We don't know what messages are working. And it's just not sustainable. And so, again, the argument that we've been making at the New Georgia Project for the past 7 years is allow us to build infrastructure that we can hire, recruit, train, and deploy an entire new generation of Black operatives and organizers who know these communities because they come from our communities. And so, like I said, we said, listen, within 48 hours of Georgia being called for the Biden and Harris administration and the announcement of the runoff, we received 10,000 requests to volunteer with us. And we were able to absorb them all. Right. And so, we knocked on 2 million doors in 9 weeks. We made over 7 million phone calls, over 4 million text messages, with 8,000 volunteers and a permanent staff of about 110, with an additional 500 part-time temporary staff. So again, and it's dedicated to moving Black voters, having conversations about things that matter, and connecting the things that they care about to this opportunity to change history, change the composition of the United States Senate, et cetera. And just there's a clarity that we've had that there is no path to victory in Georgia without overwhelming support of Black voters.
Can we say now that Georgia is pretty much flipped all the way and permanently flipped? Is it? Can I be comfortable in saying that?
No, I'm not comfortable in saying that. I mean, you know, in the ways that we speak things to existence, I'm not going to discourage you. But here's the challenge. Currently in our state, so Warnock, Ossoff, Biden, Harris, those were statewide races, right? Because Georgia has been gerrymandered to hell, our congressional districts, but also our state legislative districts. So what that means is not only do we have a Republican governor and lieutenant governor, all the constitutional offices in Georgia are Republican, and there's a Republican majority in the state house and in the state Senate, and they have just dropped 20 bills that are designed to hold on to their power, suppress the vote, get rid of vote by mail, get rid of drop boxes, et cetera. And so they're playing for keeps. And so I would say that if they are successful in passing even half of the voter suppression bills that they have introduced, we are going to be a purple state for a long time, a battleground state for a long time, where it's a game of inches.
Because, you know, I didn't want people to be fooled by the fact that just because the Secretary of State and others weren't going along with Trump, that they were on our side. You know, as you said, they're still going to they just couldn't do it in November and January. I'm sure they would have loved to. Right. That's because of what you did. Right. You swelled the numbers enough that they couldn't trick it. Right. But they still got some tricks up their sleeves, obviously.
100%. And thank you for saying that. I felt an intense amount of pressure between November and January by your colleagues and others in the media to give our Secretary of State and his spokespeople props, to give them their flowers. And people would start interviews like, isn't it great that, you know, he said that there was no voter fraud and that he certified the results of the election and that he's rebuffed the president's advances. And I'm like, okay, so you want me to congratulate him for not participating in a criminal conspiracy to steal the election as the Secretary of State and the state's chief elections officer? So thank him for doing his job. Right? Because and that's because the bar had been lowered so much that just doing your job again and not agreeing to participate in a criminal conspiracy to steal the election feels like it warrants praise. And so I'm like, I mean, you know, thank you for not breaking the law. Thank you for not being a treasonous traitor, liar. And many groups like the New Georgia Project are still under investigation. There are still active lawsuits. And again, the Secretary of State, the governor, the lieutenant governor, and all of those people that were getting praise for not going along with stealing the election are supporting these 20 bills that are introduced in the legislature that are going to make it more difficult for Georgians to vote, including their own voters.
So to be clear, can we say for certain, or do we know for certain that they didn't try a trick in November and January and it just didn't work? I mean, were there voters that were suppressed in November and January?
Listen, where do we start? They cut the number of days, early voting days, for the runoff, for people voting in runoff. That's suppression, right? People didn't have all the options. We already had limitations because of the holidays, right? The high holidays. I mean, we're talking about Thanksgiving, Christmas, Hanukkah, Kwanzaa, New Year's, festival. So like legit holidays in between those two elections. And then they cut early voting days on top of that. They cut the number of drop boxes. So where people, could drop off their absentee ballot. They don't have to wait in line. They don't have to mail it. Why? Because they've been attacking the Postal Service. Holiday mail is already notoriously wonky. You got the Postmaster General playing all kinds of games and shenanigans. And so we knew that there were going to be issues with the mail. We were encouraging people to drop off their completed ballot in drop boxes. They cut the number of drop boxes. They tried to cut the number of hours that the drop boxes were available, making the argument that if there weren't people there to monitor them, then the drop boxes shouldn't be open to the public. The whole point of the whole central conceit of having a drop box, though, is that it's supposed to make it a convenience for customers after hours. You don't need a drop box if the office is open. So we had to sue to prevent that from happening. I would say in the days before the election, the Secretary of State threatened us with criminal prosecution if we participated in any line warming activity. So Georgia has made all kinds of news, international news, for the 9, 10, 11-hour lines that people have to wait in to go vote. And so part of the work that we do, our volunteers, handing out hot chocolate, handing out coffee, bringing food trucks, etc., that they threatened us with criminal prosecution. And so we lost a bunch of volunteers in the days before the election because folks didn't want to go to jail. So yes, again, there was one voter suppression scheme that they didn't participate in, but there were several others that they did.
So can we say then you were able to compensate by getting the numbers up? I guess the rule of thumb, and you might actually have a formula for this, we know they're going to try to suppress one vote. You got to make sure turnout is what 4 or 5 times that one vote they're going to suppress. Is that
100%
calculus? Okay.
100%. I mean, the idea is that until we are able to have a Secretary of State and a governor and constitutional officers that take protecting our democracy and protecting our elections infrastructure seriously, that the only way to ensure that the will of the people is reflected in the results of our election is by having overwhelming turnout, overwhelming participation, running up the score during early voting, running up the score with vote by mail, and running up the score on election day.
Yeah, that's very important. And as you were saying, so you got a mayoral election in Georgia. Right, there's several elections, but on the mayoral piece, there's sort of an elephant in the room, right? Because we know Georgia's gentrifying like every place else. The question whether we keep Black power in the mayor's office in Georgia, that's really going to end up being the issue, isn't it?
I think that's going to be the issue. I also think that there's going to be an issue. So there are a bunch of younger Georgians, particularly younger Black voters in Atlanta and elsewhere, that are questioning the utility of just race-based politics, right? That there's an argument that can be made, like, is everybody that's my color, my kind, right? When we think about Rayshard Brooks, who was murdered by Atlanta police in the parking lot of a Wendy's, because of the grief and the grieving in the community and possibly some agent provocateurs, the Wendy's burned down. And there was so much hand-wringing and concern about a building as opposed to the Black life that was lost. And so I think that when we think about there's an extra jail in Atlanta that our current mayor ran on, or one of her first promises and one of her first public press conferences was there's a plan to close this extra jail because the truth of the sad part is that you got beds in a jail, they're going to fill them. And Atlanta has an extra jail that costs several $1 million a year to run. The promise was from the incumbent mayor to shut it down. And those of us who are talking about defunding the police, those of us who are talking about accountability, have real questions. We think about income inequality in Atlanta, and how, there's a narrative about it being a Black Mecca, right? I mean, sorry, DC. But there's definitely a narrative about Atlanta being a Black Mecca. And there are tons of, I think part of the reason why Georgia statewide is in the position that we're in is because there's so many upwardly mobile Black families moving back south and moving particularly to Georgia. And if you're born Black and poor in Atlanta, you're 90% likely to die Black and poor in Atlanta. And so there's a tale of two Atlantas, probably more, that needs to be addressed. And I think that is going to be front and center in the mayoral election that we have in a couple of months.
And then Raphael Warnock has to run for re-election next year. And you can't start that election next year. That has to start soon, right?
Right. The Reverend Warnock is running for re-election. His election date is going to be November 2022, along with the governor and all the other constitutional offices. But the primary is May of 2022. And so, you can just backdate it and think about how campaigns start 9 to 12 months before election day. So we're looking at possibly May of 2021, which is, 100 days from now.
You also mentioned other municipal offices. I mean, so all of this stuff, and that's, again, these are things we can't take for granted, because it's and say it really comes down to trying to make this second nature for our people, doesn't it? To always be aware of the voting process, be aware of voting, not just to be interested when it's a national election, not just to be interested when there's a Barack Obama or Kamala Harris on the ballot, but throughout the year. Because these are people who make decisions about our daily lives.
100%. I think that it's really important that people understand that the clarity or the cleanliness of the water that we drink, the cleanliness of the air that we breathe, whether or not your school board is forcing your school to reopen, despite the fact that teachers are not considered essential employees and are not getting vaccines. All the medical research shows that children are super spreaders, even though they don't carry the symptoms in the ways that older adults do. Like, that the fact that the mayor and the city council are the ones who negotiate the police unions contracts, right? Like, there's so much that affects our daily lives that we leave in the hands of elected officials. And if you're going to trust someone to do the people's work, make sure that they're going there to do the people's work.
And that goes for the Biden administration too. I mean, let's face it. If there's ever been any doubt, there is no more. Hands that literally once picked cotton in Georgia, picked the president, picked the Senate majority. So we have to be heard. We got to get something for that. Ain't no point doing that and then folk with, it's the same old, same old. Well, we'll get to y'all, and we can't really do that right now because that's too controversial. I mean, that's what this is about too, isn't it?
Absolutely. And so shout out to Reverend Warnock, or Senator Warnock. That's going to be weird. Senator, Reverend Senator, I don't know. But shout out to Reverend Senator Warnock, who, like, first thing, $5 billion for Black farmers. I need it. Right? I need it. Like, first thing, he stepped on first day of school. And so, like, having an agenda matters. And again, having people who are accountable to you and our community and to that agenda matters. And so I'm not going to say it's not going to be an uphill battle. I'm not going to say it's not going to be a fight. But there's comfort in knowing that you have a representative and someone who sees themselves as being there to do the people's work.
It's Black History Month. How are you feeling about this month? You made Black History. You wear that, right?
Oh, thank you, Reverend Mark.
You clear on that, right? I mean, I know that's kind of, we don't, we never realize when we're in it. But that's what you did. You made Black History, and resurrected the souls of those who did pick cotton in that state. Who gave their lives for the struggle. You lifted up our newly crowned ancestor, John Lewis. I mean, in so many ways, this was so powerful. But how are you feeling about Black History Month, where we are today, and our people's place in history?
I mean, I grew up in Atlanta, and as you all probably know, we are raised on a steady diet of King quotes. And so I think about, the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. And I think that it is long. It is super long.
Yeah.
It's very, very long, right? So at the ones, like, I'm a Delta. right? And so at once, I just had a conversation last night with some of collegiate sorority sisters talking about the role of the founders of Delta Sigma Theta in the 1913 Women's Suffrage March, right? And that, so they were marching for, one, the right to vote that they themselves would not be able to enjoy in 1913. The 19th Amendment didn't even pass until 1920. So they got in late. And so that's 7 years of organizing. And if we keep it real, it wasn't until the Voting Rights Act of 1965. So an additional 45 years after the 19th Amendment didn't Black women get the guaranteed right to vote, right? So thinking about the founders of Delta Sigma Theta and the 7 years from the Women's Suffrage March plus the additional 45 years for the Voting Rights Act of 1965 is that when there's the clarity, there's a vision for liberation, knowing that I am a part of a long arc, a long unbroken chain of people. And so sometimes when it gets overwhelming, I just have to remind myself that I'm doing my part, right? So.
And doing it to life too, and we appreciate that. Let me ask you this though. I mean, in terms of when we alluded to this several times in the conversation, even in terms of Black politicians, whether skin is enough, whether they really represent us. Does New Georgia Project do that as well in terms of, you all get voters registered, get people to the polls, but after they get in office, are you all also holding these politicians accountable? I honestly don't know if that's also in the mandate as well.
Absolutely. Okay. And quite frankly, it is the reason why we exist. I'll tell you now, we are getting a lot of attention for our electoral organizing, and I'm super grateful for it because it helps us raise money for our community and our issue organizers. But elections in the House of the New Georgia Project are merely just opportunities for us to test our power, to flex the power that we're building, right? And that's it. That's why, and to elect champions, right? People who can get to DC or get to Atlanta, to the state legislature, and do the work on behalf of our community. But, our in-between election work is most important. I'm talking about our environmental justice and our racial justice work under our campaign called the Black and Green Agenda, right? That most Americans, their wealth is in their homes. And that folks, when you look at rural Georgia and the Black Belt and coastal Georgia, the Geechee, the Gullah people, Savannah, Tybee Island, all of that are being hit with once in a decade storms every year, and losing their roofs, having to deal with racist insurance companies. So the work of the Black and Green Agenda continues. And again, having someone in Atlanta and having people in DC who understand that helps us achieve our campaign and our issue goals, right? So yes, the accountability work, grassroots lobbying, all of that is a part of the work that we're doing.
If I were a politico in Georgia, I wouldn't want to run afoul of you. You have the power to get people out to vote, to change elections. So whatever you and the New Georgia Project is demanding ought to be what I'm for. If I'm a Black politician, I'm probably not in office.
Well,
the New Georgia Project. People focus on Biden and Warnock and Ossoff and all of that, but that trickles down. So there were clearly many other races, correct, yes, that were won because of the turnout alone in November.
100%. And people have been inspired to run. So in this moment when school boards are talking about, whether or not to open and reopen, they're not asking the kids. They don't care about families, et cetera. So, what does it look like to run some 21-year-olds for school board? They just graduated. They have thoughts. They have opinions about how we can show up for our youth. And so, yes, it's school board. It's city council, it's town council, it's sheriffs, it's DAs, and it's mayors. Yeah.
I've been singing your praises. So I've been saying to people in these other states that are flippable, where we have large Black electorates, South Carolina, Mississippi. See, you all were disciplined. You and Stacey, y'all could have gone and run for president yourselves. But it takes discipline. I tell people all the time, you talk about Dr. King. So this thing I think when you remember about Dr. King and say, he didn't come out and create a social media account to be a national leader. Hello. He started in a local struggle and went from there and participated in local struggle, because ultimately all politics is local. We talk about the police. We ain't going to tweet away police violence. We ain't going to tweet defund. We have to get mayors and city councils and hold them accountable and say, you either change this police practice or you out of here.
Right.
The federal government doesn't even control the police. It is all these. So people don't want to, it's not as sexy to be on the ground locally, because I got to do the clout chasing. I got to have likes and clicks and everything, but that's a whole nother thing. We can talk about it. But
ooh, why you out here telling people business, Reverend?
I do the retweets. That's what I need. But I mean, I can have 50,000 retweets, but if I ain't moved 50,000 people on the ground to vote for or vote against someone who could make a decision on the police, that's just on Twitter. And them 50,000 folk on Twitter may not even vote in the local jurisdiction I'm dealing with.
Half of them don't even. So half of them are bots.
You don't even get me started. That's a whole nother thing. So to have the discipline, that's what I'm saying. We need the New Georgia Project discipline in South Carolina, in Mississippi, because some of us see it there. This can be replicated.
Right.
Can it not?
Absolutely. And I would tell you that a lot of that work is already happening. So we are in right relationship, or working to be in right relationship with our comrades and folks in South Carolina, in North Carolina, Mississippi, Alabama. I believe very deeply in so we have a colleague named Mary Hooks, who always says that, part of our work is to avenge the suffering of our ancestors, and to make sure that the future generations are proud of us. And so I know it's a bunch of Black folks, smart Black folks, committed Black folks who are in, again, right relationship with community, who want to see Mississippi change, who want to drag South Carolina kicking and screaming into the future.
And that's exactly what we need. And you have done that. You have dragged us all kicking and screaming, get ourselves together. And we so appreciate you. Before we go, how can those listening be supportive of you and the work of the New Georgia Project?
Well, I'm a church girl. Your time, your talent, or your treasure is what we need in this moment. I tell people that, again, the arc of the Moore universe is long. It's super, super long. And we need to be able to sustain ourselves to do this work. We need to sustain ourselves to maintain our independence. And so thinking about what time do you have? We are about to launch our voter registration year. We have a goal of registering an additional 60,000 young people and people of color in Georgia. And that starts at the end of this month. There is newgeorgiaproject.org/donate. Always welcome for that. And if there are ways that you see that you can contribute to our org from follow us, like us, subscribe to our newsletter, subscribe to our mailing list, follow us on social media. We have been innovating around voter education. Our research shows that 70% of Gen Z got their information about elections from social media. Yeah. So we want to show up in that place every day. That's what we need. Folks, we encourage you to do that. Your name is so powerful. What does it mean? Nse Ufot. What does that mean? So you're going to laugh. So my full first name is Nse Abasi, and it actually means that I'm looking up to God, or I see the God in you, or I see the God in situations. So I'm supposed to be the family diplomat, the village diplomat. I'm supposed to see the good, see the God in situations. But it's funny because Nse literally means to see, and I've been wearing glasses since I was like 5 years old. But my granny said it's a spiritual seeing, Reverend Mark. That's what it is. It's, we walk by faith and not by sight. There we go. There we go. There we go. So,
What about Ufot? What does that mean?
So Ufot, second son.
Second son. Okay, that's different. All right.
Yeah, I mean, and so I think like ancestor was the second son.
Yeah. So, folks, when we talk about history, the great African warrior queens, and we think of names like Nzinga and Nefertari and Hatshepsut, years from now, Nse is a name that we will call in those ranks, because this was a war in Georgia and it ain't stopped. Matter of fact, we still fighting a war against white supremacy.
Right.
And Georgia has been that cradle for quite some time. And so, in a real sense, this was not a violent military warfare, but it was a war to get us to the ballot box, to prevent us from being suppressed, and to get as many people through as possible. And that is an ongoing struggle. And Nse is an example. Some of us are still waiting on, Dr. King and Jesus to come back. But in the interim, it's some of us in the mirror. All right. And that's Nse. She didn't wait on that. She did what she needed to do. And everybody in New Georgia did what they needed to do. And they heard her. So that's a lot of influence. Anybody that can get folk to not be preoccupied with Thanksgiving and Christmas. That's who y'all want to organize whatever event you have it. All right. This sister. Right. So she can make $1 billion just to organize folks to come to events. But what she's done is get us mobilized to vote. And we are so thankful and really saved us all, even saved folk who didn't realize they need saving. Some of you white folks, some of you white women, wasn't nothing for you in keeping Trump or keeping Mitch McConnell in power. Nothing for you. A lot of times folks vote against their own interests. That's y'all, right. Including some Georgia. Real quick, what did, because I haven't seen final numbers, what did white women in Georgia do in the runoff?
I don't have those gender numbers right in front of me, but I'll tell you this, that basically we are looking at about 70% of white Georgians voting for Trump, and 29-30% of white Georgians voting for Biden and others. So we're looking at about 7 out of 10 white voters in Georgia still voting for Republicans, even in this moment, even after everything that they've seen, all of the transcripts, all of the tapes, etc. But but why I'm also proud of that number is that it shows that it is truly a multiracial, multi-ethnic, multilingual progressive majority that's led by Black voters. That is what it takes to win in Georgia.
Right.
Because you only need 29% of white voters to win.
So the runoff was meant to stop us. You think they'll change now? We don't need no more runoffs. You think that's what they're going to do now?
I mean, listen, they're talking about it. If Georgia has had no excuse, vote by mail, absentee balloting for 15 years. So a lot of states expanded it because of the pandemic, right? Added vote by mail because of the pandemic. Georgia Republicans passed that law in 2005. And so if they're willing to get rid of vote by mail, their law that has been on the books for 15 years, that they're looking at the runoff. They are.
Yeah. That's right. People like, oh, we can't vote in the runoff. But then I said, but you know what though? Tell me if I'm wrong. Last thing, there might be a blessing that is so close together. See, I thought after November, it would be hard, correct me if I'm wrong, and say for people to forget about January. Like if it was like 6 months apart, to me, this seems like a heavy lift. But folks left November, and then November 4th, they were clear. We got to do this again in a couple of months. Am I right?
I mean, people weren't exactly clear. That's why our efforts, our campaign was necessary, because I definitely showed up on people's porches like, hey, I'm here to talk about the runoffs. And they were like, no, baby, I already voted. Go ahead. And I was like, I know, that's why I'm here. So it was a heavy lift. There's just no way around it. I think the exhaustion right, of dealing with the previous 4 years, that there's a moment, like a sigh of relief, but also a recognition that the work wasn't done. And I think that's why we're going to be so aggressive during these first 100 days, actually throughout the entire administration, because you didn't come to Georgia and say, I need a 50-50 Senate, but moderate your expectations because of the legislative filibuster, so we might not be able to get anything done that working families need. That was not the stump speech. You said, I need Warnock, I need Ossoff, so that we can get stuff done for American families, for Georgia families. And so that's what our expectation is. That's the energy that we're carrying throughout the 117th Congress.
And that's what we need. Folks, support the New Georgia Project. Website once again?
New Georgia Project, spelled all the way out, newgeorgiaproject.org.
Queen Nse Ufot has been our guest. We with you, sister. And not just to run our mouths, give us assignments too.
Will do. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. I love your platform. I love how you leverage it to tell our stories, to get us organized. Thank you.
Thank you. Nse Ufot, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks for getting woke and listening to Make It Plain. Please remember to listen, like, subscribe, and wherever you get your podcasts, please give the show a 5-star rating. And please do spread the word. Let's all continue to pray for each other during this pandemic and this police-demic. If all hearts and minds are clear, it has been made plain.
Be a barbecue hero with delicious, ultra-low net carb hero bread, buns, and tortillas. Soft and fluffy, high in fiber, and with 0 grams of sugar, up to 10 grams of protein, coming in at under 100 calories per serving. Oh, and did I mention they taste like their mouth-watering traditional versions? I mean, what's not to love? Use code AH10 for 10% off your first hero bread purchase at hero.co. That's AH10 for 10% off at hero.co.